We're back, and we're going to give you the 5-minute guide to the Constitution. First, the U.S. Constitution, written over 220 years ago, remains the foundation of our government and guides those who run our nation to this day.
Let's take a closer look at how the Constitution designed the organization and function of our American government.
Okay, the Constitution starts out with the preamble, and what this does is it describes the purpose of government and the principles that guide the rest of the document. So, for instance, it talks about liberty, democracy, and common good. If you're interested in learning more about the preamble, check out our quick guide to the preamble by clicking there.
Article 1 of the Constitution establishes the legislative branch. It's the branch of government that is responsible for making laws. Basically turns the citizens' wants and needs into laws, and in there establishes a representative democracy.
Article 1 also sets up the organization, the qualifications of legislators, as well as the frequency of elections. So, for instance, in the Senate, you have to be 30 years old, a citizen for 9 years, and live in their state. There are 2 per state, and they're 6-year terms. However, in the House of Representatives, you only have to be 25 years old, citizen for 7 years living in the state. Based on population, okay, it's 435 right now, and you have 2-year terms in the House of Representatives.
Powers of Congress. Some of the most important ones: collect taxes, borrow money, pay off any debts that the U.S. has, make rules for citizenship, regulate commerce, declare war, and one thing that we'll get into a little bit later in the year, make laws that are necessary and proper to carry out the powers that are listed above, also known as the Elastic Clause.
Article 2 is the executive branch. This is the branch that enforces or executes the laws. The President of the United States is the head of this branch, and this article also describes the qualifications of president, the powers of the office, impeachment, as well as the electoral college system and how we actually choose our next president.
Powers of the president. Probably number 1 would be commander-in-chief at the head of the military. Maintain a cabinet of advisors. You see in the photo there, the president's cabinet. Pardons treaties, appoint ambassadors, and Supreme Court justices, which is always a huge media event when that takes place, and make sure laws are carried out.
Article 3 is the judicial branch. Now, this branch interprets the laws, and their main job is to decide what the law means, as well as whether that the government has been following the laws that have been established.
Article 3 creates our Supreme Court. It also allows Congress to create other federal courts, which deal with federal laws, not state laws. Judges are appointed. We don't elect federal judges. They're appointed by the president and confirmed by the Senate, and they serve for life.
Okay, Article 4 talks about state powers and how they can enforce their laws and how they deal with other states. So, for instance, some of the interactions that are described are how they respect laws of other states, how they respect other court decisions, and also extradition. So if a fugitive escapes to one state, how do you deal with that? Where does it get tried? And things of that nature.
Article 4 also deals with how new states can be admitted to the U.S. with the authorization of Congress and the President. Remember, we started out with 13. We've grown all the way to 50. Article 4 outlines that process. The only requirement, really, make sure that you have a Republican form of government.
Okay, so no state dictatorships.
Correct.
Everyone has to have a democratic state government. Okay, Article 5 talks about the amendment process. That's how the Constitution is changed. There are 2 ways to do it, but the one that's mostly used is the first step, which is to propose an amendment. That's needed by 2/3 of both houses of Congress. And then to ratify the amendment, that means to approve of it and make it official, you need 3/4 of the state legislatures. If that happens, you have a change to the Constitution.
Article 6 tells us that the U.S. Constitution is the supreme law of the land. This means that if there's a conflict between federal law and state law, federal law will always win. It requires state and federal government officials also to take an oath to support the Constitution as well.
And lastly, Article 7 is about ratification. It said 9 out of the 13 states were needed to approve of it. And during the debates afterward, they decided that most people wanted more specific rights granted in the Constitution. So they said, okay, if you sign this, we're going to add the first 10 amendments, which will list these rights, and that's going to be called the Bill of Rights. So our first 10 amendments today were a compromise to try to get more states to sign the Constitution, which was eventually done. All right, guys, there you have it, our 5-minute guide to the Constitution. We'll go over each one in more depth throughout the year. See you next video.